All right. Welcome everybody to class number 4. Hopefully some more folks kind of trickle in, but I do want to go ahead and just get started to honor everybody's time. So today we're going to be talking about the Farm Food Safety Plan and kind of what that is, what that means. We'll touch on risk assessments and then dive into traceability a little bit. And George PV, I believe it was you. We did want to answer back on your question. So your air drying device is perfectly fine. And then Lisa will
Thank,
be
thank
sending out,
you.
yep, no worries, no problem. Um, an email regarding the rubbish bin lid, that whole scenario. There's a bit of more kind of trickier information on it, but overall, what it seems like is if the rubbish bin is indoors, it doesn't need to have a lid. And if it's outside, it does. But we do have some language on that we can circulate so you guys can take a look.
So when it's inside, you don't need a lid on it, right?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. That was my question. So,
Okay. Perfect. Um, okay, so the Farm Food Safety Plan um, is an HGAP requirement. It's not a FSMA requirement, but it is required for the harmonized GAP standard. And it's a very lengthy document. It's anywhere from 20 to 30 pages. And it just lays out all of your policies, your standing operating procedures, um, everything. It's a very detailed document. And it is required by some third-party buyers, occasionally in place of a certification. So it's a good document to have. So why have a farm food safety plan? It puts organization to and focus on produce safety practices on the farm. So again, it's got everything in there. It's nice to have when you have a new employee. It's easy to kind of just hand this over to them and have them read it through and understand all the ins and outs of your farm. And it's also nice because it could be used as a training tool. So if you do have a new employee um, that you've hired onto the farm, you guys can go over this farm food safety plan and definitely document that in Heavy Connect as a training. So it shows that the farm has reviewed its operation, how it'll address and reduce risks, and who is responsible for that. And there's also the disciplinary policy for food safety violations in there as well. It's a good place, like I mentioned, for documenting SOPs and policies. It could be referred to, used as a training tool and guide. So what we will cover in the Farm Food Safety Plan, who does it, what goes into it. Remember, the goal is always to reduce risk. It cannot ever be eliminated completely, but the goal is always just to reduce the risk. And what else is needed after the Farm Food Safety Plan is written. So we'll get into all of that. So developing the plan, who does it? So I think we've already mentioned this, but we will do that for you. But of course, with all of your input and information. So again, we take a starting point for us is using your homework to start creating that plan. So we start gathering all that information and inputting it into this document. And then after the coursework, when we begin working with you more one-on-one, we'll gather more information, all of the details, and continue kind of massaging this and working on this. It's always a work in progress because things are always changing. Things, maybe are done differently or the standard could change. So it's always kind of this work in progress, but it is a requirement and it does need to be reviewed at least annually and have a signature on that document. And what else does this slide say? So a single person or small team from the farm should be the point of contact for North Shore EVP. So this is really important to have a solid point of contact. for us to be in contact with you. So whether that's you or maybe you have a farm manager, typically we're all on like a texting basis with whoever that farm manager or point of contact person is. So it's really important to have good communication, and this person needs to be able to make the decisions on the farm. So if something needs to change or be improved, this person should have the authority to do that. And be willing to contact for food safety. Yeah, we went over that. So developing the plan, oh, here we go. Okay, the point of contact, I already kind of touched on this, but again, just super important. We need to have really good communication. It's really hard to kind of move forward with things when there's a lack of communication. It kind of puts everything to a halt. So again, just having a solid person to be the point of contact is super important. And this person should be able to provide training to your other employees as well on the farm practices, the policies. If things change, this person should be able to have the authority to do that. And they commit to making sure the farm food safety plan is implemented. So they also know the ins and outs of the plan and are just making sure that everybody on the farm is sticking to the plan and following it. Something that did recently just happen is at one of our external audits, the farm kind of managers knew about the farm plan, but a lot of, I guess, the information wasn't relayed over to the employees. And so when the auditor asked the employees certain questions, they were saying something completely different than what the farm plan states. And we really don't want that. The plan is there to make sure that everybody is on the same page. And if things change, like the information is relayed. So it's really a good document to have just to keep everybody on the same page and knowing what all of the procedures are. So what goes into the plan? It's going to start off with some basic information like the name, location, description of what's growing, the acreage. Maps must be included, and that's a previous homework. So I think we have most everybody's maps. The point of contact person will be there right up at the top, and then also an alternate point of contact. So if the main person is traveling or off island or sick or something, we do need to have a backup person that we're able to contact. And if you don't have one of those people, just let us know. If you're, if it's mostly just you on the farm, that's okay. Just let us know. But we do have to have that that second contact if possible. And then a measurable food safety policy. So an example of this is just your farm name's goal is to achieve and maintain USDA harmonized GAP certification. All employees must understand and follow the practices outlined in this farm food safety plan. Something like that, super basic, but it is measurable because we've got all of these records in place. So any auditor person's able to go back and see, okay, this farm is following all of their procedures that are listed in their farm plan. And then worker roles, responsibility, and organizational structure. So any of your other employees that are on the farm will be listed there as well, and what their roles are on the farm. And then some policy risk assessment summary and plans for. So a lot of this stuff is going to come for your from the risk assessment, and we'll touch on that today and also in the next class. But these are the topics that we're going to go over. Worker health and hygiene policies. There's going to be a section in the plan talking about this, what those policies are. Are you using gloves? Are you not? Hand washing stuff, all of that's listed in there. Wildlife and domesticated animals. So if you do have domesticated animals on the farm, we'll want to know that. We'll want to put that in your plan. What kind of ag water you're using for production and post-harvest, land history and adjacent land use, including flooding, crop protection and amendments, and food defense. So all of these topics we will dive into more in detail in your risk assessment. And your risk assessment, again, we'll touch on this a little bit later, but it is coming up, and basically it's a one-on-one meeting for a new farm. It's typically about an hour, where we kind of go through down the list of all these things, and we can get more information about your farm and talk about any risks and how to mitigate those. And then so right here, this is just the section on the standard G 2.1 that states there shall be a written food safety plan. The plan shall cover the operation and products covered shall be defined. So you can see the WP right here stands for written policy, and that dot is in the mandatory column. So this is a mandatory part of the standard. So as we work with you to create and document your farm plan, we will be reviewing this information with you again. So it is a team effort, but it's mostly on us. So we've got a very large template that we work off of. And so we'll be meeting with you to get all of those details. We will ask you to identify processes on your farm or in your operation that may carry risk or have that impact on food safety. So again, this is things that we'll talk about in your risk assessment and include some of that information into the farm plan. Please be open and honest. We are working with you to help identify ways that you can improve your operation. So a lot of times farmers will just kind of tell us what they think that they should say, or what we want to hear, but that's definitely not the case. We want to just know what are your real practices. If there's huge red flags, don't worry, we'll tell you. But we do want to just make it as accurate as possible. So whatever is actually happening on the farm is what the farm plan should state, because again, a lot of times during audits, there's trouble because the farm plan is not accurate, and what's actually happening on the farm, what auditors are actually observing is different than what the farm plan states. So again, we don't want that.
No.
Okay.
What's that?
So what else is needed after the farm food safety plan is written? Like I mentioned, it just needs to stay relevant. So things are always changing. Maybe procedures change. Maybe you end up using a different product, or you want to grow something else and add that to your list of certified crops. This is always a changing document that's always a work in progress. So it needs to stay relevant. It's super important that it stays accurate. So some examples: new practices, new workers, things are not working as they should be, and the procedure is adjusted. Yearly updates are required more often during the first year after the plan is written, and then if requirements of the food safety certification program changes. So we did have some changes to the standard a couple years back, so we needed to go in and edit all of the farm plans to match the current standard. So again, just keeping it current and relevant. And then risk assessments. I can't see the number, Lisa. Is this you or is this me?
Yep, that's me.
Okay.
We have a lot of slides today, guys. So Ingrid and I are bouncing back and forth so you don't get bored. So we're just a bit more on risk assessments. Ingrid did a great job going over them, and we'll dive in deeper in coming classes and individually with you. But the purpose of it, just to get you thinking ahead, it's really to define what are the contamination risks on your farm. And in particular, there are a couple main categories that she showed you. That's what we'll be talking about. Really, it's kind of divided into just three things. You want to think about what are the hazards, what are you doing to mitigate them, or what corrective actions will you take if this hazard does occur. So like she said, the sections are water sources, the land use, so how your land has been used in the past, because that can pose risk, what your harvesting practices are. On that, we're going to really want a lot of detail. Tools and equipment, and we should add in here also buildings. If you have buildings that you're using, in particular for post-harvest activities, we want to think about risks that could be occurring in there. And then ag chemicals, that's another really big one. So thinking about how they're stored, containment, how they're used, things like that. The risk assessment is a heavy lift in this first year. It'll take us a while to go through it, but we will go over it every single year with you. In subsequent years, it'll be a much quicker process unless something changes, but it is a requirement to update it every year. So we will do that. And then how it will be documented, we actually write everything down and we provide that, put it in your Heavy Connect account so that if an auditor wants to see that you've done a risk assessment, it's there. In some cases in the standards, certain criteria require it to be written and some do not. So we just take the position that we're going to write it all down. And just to kind of show you what it looks like, this is just one example of what the risk assessment document looks like that you're eventually going to get. We use a Google Sheets workbook to do this, and so each tab is a different category. But essentially, just to kind of get you thinking about it, you're going to be thinking about the hazards. In column B, you'll see we have a couple hazards. Chemical, physical, and biological are the hazards that we typically kind of think about. And then flooding, in some criteria, we do have to add flooding in there. Oops, sorry about that. Let me go back. And so in those cases, we will include what are the hazards with respect to flooding on this particular category. We'll identify the hazard with you, and that will just help guide you through this process of thinking about it. Usually it's kind of slow when it starts off, and then it goes faster once everybody gets the gist of what we're doing. We'll talk about what practices you use to mitigate the hazard. That's basically just what you're doing. You already know what all these things are on your farm, and you probably have something in place that you're already doing to make sure that XYZ doesn't happen. Monitoring and verification, that section will be just how do we know that we're watching over this or observing whether this is a problem, and are we recording it anywhere? And then the last column is any corrective or preventive actions that you might be taking. So this is a place where we would list, like, here's, if we see pigs repeatedly getting into the field over in this section, what are the corrective actions we might take, or preventive actions? That could include getting more hunters to come onto your property at certain times. It might include fencing. It might include changing the crop area. So lots of different things can fall into that category. So just to kind of get you thinking about the risk assessments, we're not going to go into it any further now, but do start thinking about it. And like I said, it's something that you probably already know all the answers to, but we'll walk you through it. Other things to start thinking about that you'll need to put some information into the farm plan about our traceability exercise. The traceability exercise is really what we like to call one step forward, one step back. And it's ability to track your product when it's in the field, what went into it, and when it leaves your possession, it goes to its intended destination, next destination, the buyer. What information do you have about that? So we want to make sure that you're thinking about this as you start to keep records. Putting as much information into your records as possible will help with doing proper traceability. It's important. We'll talk about why in just a little bit, but make sure that your records are detailed. Traceability exercises are really important for commercial and institutional purchasing, wholesaling. If you're selling direct to consumer, so at the farmer's market, a CSA, you're advertising somewhere, or you have a farm stand, in those cases, you don't need to worry about the traceability exercise. It's not required because it's very difficult to track that product forward in those scenarios. But any other type of selling that you're doing commercially, institutional purchasing, et cetera, you are going to have to be able to do the traceability. And a quick look at the standard, you can see a documented traceability program shall be established. That word shall is the key. You can see the little dot under the mandatory column. So it is something that you do need to be able to do. It requires a written policy, which will just essentially outline that you have such a program and here's how you're going to do it. And then records, which You really can't do traceability if you don't have records. So that's important to note. They do need to be detailed. You will see down here the next G6.2, the next criteria, a trace back and trace forward exercise shall be performed at least annually. That one doesn't have the mandatory dot, but if you don't do it, you're certainly going to get a corrective action for that from an auditor. So best to do it. Just helps you understand, yes, my records are complete and robust enough to be able to know what went into my crop and where did my crop go. The advantages of traceability, there are a couple that are worth noting. It's really useful when you have potentially a buyer who might complain about something about your product. If you have information to say, I know when my limes were harvested, I know who packed them, and I know when they left and dropped them off at your facility, it kind of helps to keep the buyer honest when they might complain about the product, or we've had farmers who have had situations where the buyers say, oh, this doesn't look very fresh, so now we don't want to pay you what we promised to pay. So just important to have all that documentation. But also on a more positive side, it really helps you if you keep track of what your buyers are buying, how much they're buying, when they're buying it, what crop is it. It kind of helps you identify where your operation can go. Where are you looking to sell more of this particular product? If it's really popular, maybe there's another buyer you might want to start to sell it to. So things like that are just data points that you really want to be able to keep. More importantly, though, probably at least for the food safety standard and certification, is if you have a good traceability program, you could perform a recall if you needed to do so. Most of the time, for a lot of our small growers, we don't have that problem, but it can crop up depending on certain situations. And so part of the Harmonized GAP standard will require that you do a mock or a pretend recall exercise every year. This is going to entail contacting one of your buyers and saying, I'm going to do a mock recall. I need you to identify where these cases of lettuce are right at the moment and get back to me within 4 hours. There is a time frame on this particular exercise. And the purpose of this is really so that you have confidence that your process is solid, that you can identify, here's how much of my product that went out, here's where it went, and my buyer can also identify where it is right now. And that way, any potential issues, for example, contamination, maybe you got a water sample back that was out of its limits and you didn't know till your product already left the farm, or maybe there was a mistake in mixing pesticides and an over application was made. This way we can let folks know, hey, pull that lettuce off the shelf. We can't sell it and we need to know where it went. So very important to be able to perform this mock recall exercise and know that the process works. And that's where the one step forward, one step back really comes in. One step back, really, you're doing your records, you're putting all this information in about what went in that field. So what kind of fertilizers did you put in? When did you do that? What type of sprays, if any, were put on them? All of that information about the input as the crop is growing. And also when it comes to harvest. So what day did you harvest? What crop? How much? Who packed it or who harvested it? And who put it on the truck and or took it to its destination? The one step forward piece, again, that's about the buyer. So who bought it? How much of it did they buy? And hopefully they're going to be able to take it the next step if you ever did have to call them and say, oh, we need to pull that off the shelf. So this is the key information when we say one step forward, one step back. This is what it's really referring to. So to do that traceability and to make sure that you have a solid traceability program in case you ever needed to do a recall, your records need to be detailed. So as you start keeping records in Heavy Connect, you want to start really looking at that. All the sections ideally should be filled out in your records. You want to have the date of harvest, if it's a harvest record, how much, where did it come from on your farm? We're going to talk about this in just a second. Who transported it, if it was someone from your team, or if the buyer came and picked it up, then you would note that. You might have other information that you want to have in there too. For example, you might have something about if you have reusable packaging, how much of that went out, is it coming back? Things like that might be on your harvest record. Those records are customizable. So if there's information you want to gather, we can put that on the record for you. So again, keeping consistent, detailed records is really key. So we want to take a second to talk a bit about maps and locations. This is important as you start to build your robust records. Your harvest records in particular will identify where you're harvesting on your farm. And you already probably did your map for us. That's really important. It is, as Ingrid said earlier, it's a requirement to have a map. And it really is helpful for the auditor, whether that's one of us or the USDA auditor. It helps us get a sense of where things are located on the farm, particularly if we haven't been there before. So we can get a sense of, oh, I'm going to a farm and there's, 3 main growing areas. Or if I'm doing your risk assessment and you say, oh yeah, my farm flooded last year. Well, what part of your farm flooded? The whole thing or just a certain block? So this is really an important piece, and the more detail you can put on your map, the better. This helps with traceability and harvest records because you're able to really dial down into what area were you harvesting in. And it will help us in the future as, if you're not already doing this, as you develop what we call lot codes. So as you're preparing your product for sale, especially in those commercial and institutional markets, having an identifier on your lot or your amount of harvestable product that went out is really useful. That way, it allows you to pull things back if you need to, but not all of your product. So putting that information into the map, letting us know where it is, allows us to sort of populate Heavy Connect in a little bit more detailed way. And that way, when you go into your harvest log, for example, you can choose from a drop-down list, like, oh, I harvested my tomatoes from block 2. To give you a better sense of really what that looks like, we have a map here. And so first thing to note is, what is this? What is this? Where is it? It's Bill's farm. So that's our first piece of information. That's the name. You can see that it's been divided into 2 areas. So area 1, which is a lot of not crop growing space, and then area 2, which is our field. And then within field A, this particular farm has been divided into 4 blocks. So we've got about half the field here is for corn, and then we've got daikon, eggplant, and tomato blocks. So this is a good example of a farm that's pretty simple. They just have that one big field, and then they've divided that out into smaller areas where they're growing these particular things. We can adjust the maps and locations from year to year. So if this is your situation, but next year you're going to rotate your corn block to the other side, no problem. We can definitely do that. So just keep that in mind. So if you look at this in Heavy Connect, you're going to see the label or location area. So the grower level, that's what I said. Where are we? This is Bill's farm. So that's the information we would input there. Oops, go back. The first level is going to be area. So again, in that particular map, we looked at area 1, which was over here where the parking is, and area 2 where the field is. Then our second level of locations is going to be the sections. And so this one is kind of detailed. We've got a field, and then we've got a note here where our restroom, our break area, our post-harvest, etc. So all of those things are identified. You maybe don't have to get this detailed if you don't want to, but certainly it's an option. And then the third level, this is where we really want to be detailed if we can, is the blocks. So if you have a big field or 2 big fields and you're growing a lot of things in there, we want to try to sort of identify that and delineate it so that we can say, this is where your limes are, this is where your corn is, this is where your mango is. That's very helpful to when you're identifying places on the map and filling out the records. So again, just kind of a look-see at this one. We've got Bill's farm here. We've got field A. So let's say that Bill's workers applied fertilizer to the corn on Monday. We go to fill that out. We want to know, like, well, exactly where is that, right? So we can say something really vague, like, yep, workers applied fertilizer to the corn on Monday. But if we have all this laid out, then we're able to say with specificity that fertilizer went to area 2, field A, block 4 on this date, March 27th. This is 2022, a couple years ago. So that's really the beauty of being a little bit more detailed in the mapping process. It gives a lot of discrete data right there on that particular task. How does that affect traceback though? So this is the key piece. When we're talking about an example for traceback, trace forward, let's say our example is we've got 50 pounds of cucumbers. So we've been given this lot code here. We'll talk about those in just a minute. They were delivered to Foodland in January. So we can ignore the dates. But let's say that in LNC's farm, area 2 and area 3, we irrigate with county water. Area 1, though, it's closer to a ditch system. So we irrigate it with that. And we've got overhead irrigation. And let's say that we just got our water test back from area 1 and our E. coli level is high. So it's out of spec and we don't want to accept that. We sent those cucumbers already to Foodland and now we got our water sample back and we're looking at the data and we see, uh-oh, this E. coli might be a problem. So we're going to use this lot code and we're going to call our buyer and say, we might need to pull these. And the beautiful thing about this is that because we've done a really good job of laying out our map, we know right here on the lot code, our date of harvest, and here's the location on our farm. So we know exactly which cucumbers we need to pull, and we don't have to necessarily pull all the other crops that we sent to Foodland. So this is where being detailed is really important in a real life scenario. So here's an example, again, of really getting detailed. This is for a much more complex operation. You don't have to go this far if you don't want to, but certainly it's open to you. And we're not going to go too much farther into this because we don't want to take a ton of time and most folks' operations are pretty simple, but just know that it is a possibility. Again, in Heavy Connect, when you're seeing it, this is how it's going to lay out. So it'll tell you exactly where your blocks are, what field and what area they're in, if you decide to be really detailed about it. I think it's almost back to Ingrid now, yes?
Yes. Okay, so just continuing on the traceability and mock recall exercises. This is the information that you're going to want to have for this exercise. So for traceback, your farm name, product and date of harvest, identification, where it came from, how much, and any inputs that were put onto that product. For trace forward, who are the recipients, the lot number, quantity, and who was it transported by. So for the mock recall, like Lisa mentioned, you'll want to have the date, the responsible party. This will be documented in your farm food safety plan. So you will have to have a team created for these exercises. So on your farm food safety plan, there's going to be your recall team. And so it'll most likely be, you know, the farm manager, maybe the regular employees that are involved on the farm. It's up to you who you want on your recall team, but we will have to have that information on the farm plan. The start time and finish time, so the length that it took to perform the whole recall, all the product information, the vendor name, and the client response. So we do need to have on record the response from your buyer and have that on file. And so we'll include the attachment of the client response, email or text is fine too. So like Lisa mentioned, it has to be done within 4 hours. And, you know, this kind of looks like a lot, you know, when you're first looking at it, but Heavy Connect makes it pretty easy. Like it's really just a step-by-step process and you'll input your information and just take it one step at a time. We even have a template email like ready to go that we can give to you that you can just put your name in and send it to your buyer that states that you're performing a mock recall. Yeah, so it's usually done. It does not usually take 4 hours. Typically, a lot of our farms get this done within an hour, maybe 2. And you can even warn your buyer ahead of time, like, hey, I'm going to be performing a mock recall, this week. So keep an eye out for my email or keep an eye out for, a text message from me. So they're aware and we're able to have that communication on file. So this is what the record looks like on Heavy Connect if you were to download it. These are kind of the questions that you'll be answering on Heavy Connect. And then this is how it's formatted, like I said, once you download it. So the start time of the exercise, you'll list all your internal recall team members. So whoever's was on the farm that day or whoever's regularly on the farm. And the auditor will review the operations established recall team contact information, what the product is. So here it was green onion. Identify the records you have for the crop. So again, that's why records are just super important. So you'll list here all of the records that you use to perform the mock recall. The date of harvest, again, the amount, the location. So again, this is just a step-by-step process, and you'll just start inputting all the information on Heavy Connect. And then this is what's generated for the trace forward part of the record. So who was the buyer, the address, how much did they receive, are reusable containers in use for this product packaging? That's important to know. Who was it transported by, and then the end time of the traceability exercise. And then this is what the mock recall section looks like. So again, just a few questions to answer. The buyer communication, who did you speak to? For the mock recall, did you follow what your farm plan says that what will happen if you were to perform a mock recall or a recall? So you'll mark yes or no. During the mock recall exercise, we have followed the written procedures in our farm plan detailing communication with customers about the recalled products. Did you do that? Yes or no? Your buyer response, you can type in the kind of the main part of what was said, but we'll also, like I mentioned, want to have that email or whatever other communication on file, and then just a summary of how it went. So this is an actual mock recall that a farm did. So this is all real information and what a farmer actually put in. I think this one's back to you, Lisa.
Sorry, I was trying not to hit my buttons too hard because they seem really sensitive today. Okay, so I promise this will make a lot of sense when you implement it, or once we get a little further down if you're not already doing it. We're going to take a few minutes to talk about lot codes, or what we can call tracking codes. We've mentioned them already. You may be familiar with them or using them. So if that's the case, if you have any tips for folks in this class who aren't using them, feel free at the end or throw it in the chat to share that. But a lot code is really helpful. It can be whatever you want it to be. So a combination of letters, you can use numbers, you can use symbols, you can use words, whatever you want to do to identify what you harvested and how it's moving through the system. So anything that you like to use, it's up to you. Ideally, you want a way to identify on that lot code where that product came from. So again, that goes back to setting these locations on your map that we will put into Heavy Connect. You want it to be specific to that individual lot and to go with it. So it's on the box, on the invoice, on the paperwork, whatever, because that's important to later, if you did have to recall, to be able to pull it out from a larger delivery or a larger set of things that were transported. That means that you get to decide how big the lot is. So it is a distinct portion of your crop or your harvest. but you decide how big or how small that portion is. So what I mean by that is if you harvested tomatoes from a couple fields on Tuesday, your lot could be all of those tomatoes. Or you can say, nope, it's just the ones that came from field 2 on Tuesday or the whole week. It's, again, your decision how big or how small you want your lot to be. What that means is that if a recall did have to happen, the bigger your lot is, the more stuff that you have to pull. So just keeping that in mind, if you have really small lots, like just my eggplant from field 1, and then my eggplant from field 2 is a separate lot, that means that it's just more things for you to track. So I think with the digital system, tracking is pretty easy. It just means that you've got to manage it. So it's up to you how you want to do it, what you feel comfortable with. One of the ways that we like to suggest that people create lot codes is using what's called a Julian calendar or a perpetual date calendar. This was actually introduced to us by a local farm, Twin Bridge Farms, who uses it. And the reason that people like to use this style is that it's not easily recognized by buyers or by consumers, by people in the store. And the advantage there is that sometimes when people see a date on a package, they just make an assumption that that's an expiration date. That may not be the case, but if the date is, for example, a harvested date, and they're buying it 3 days later and they're thinking, oh my gosh, this is expired. Well, that might not be the case, but that's what they're assuming. So Julian dates can help prevent that because they're not really easy to for regular people necessarily to understand. It also helps reduce confusion on actual expiration dates. And the way that it works is it's the day of the month, and you're going to use one of these little 3 number codes that correspond. So today is March 5th. So we look at March and then we go down to the 5th. The day of the year is the 64th, 064. That's the code that you would use if you were harvesting things today. So very simple, very easy. Instead of putting March 5th, 2025 on your items, you could put 064. Most people have no idea what that means. The other thing to think about, whoops, I did it again, in your lot code system is if you want to have a code to identify who picked and or who packed your product. This can just be an initial, it could be a number, or it could be a symbol if you want to get really fancy. But this way, internally is a good way for you to know, oh, I can keep track of this this person's stuff that they're picking, this person's stuff that they're packing, especially if you have any inconsistencies. And then field and row identification, this gets down into, again, the locations. Where is stuff coming from? So adding that into your lot code can really draw down, again, on what exactly is the amount of stuff that needs to be recalled if it came from this particular area of my farm. So helps you to sort of identify where things came from and what went into those fields. We're going to just kind of go over like what this might look like in a real scenario. So in this format, we're going to use the harvest date off of the Julian calendar, a field identifier, a section or row identifier, and then a picker packer, which is the person or persons who did those tasks. So in scenario number 1, Dea harvested and packed cilantro on November 25th from field 2, row 4. So the lot code here, 24329. So 2024, that's the year. 329 is the day of the year. So on the Julian calendar, you look at that November 25th, it's the day of the year is number 329. 2 identifies the field, 4 identifies the row, and D is the picker or packer, which was Dea. So really simple, but you can put that number system in place, or numbers and letters, and that will help you know everything that's going on with that particular lot, and someone else who's not familiar with your operation has no idea what that means. So again, going over it one more time, this one very similar, but has a picker and a packer. So I harvested green onions from field 4, row 5 and 6 on January 6th, and then Ingrid packed them on the same day for next day delivery. So our lot code here, the year is 25. The 6th day of the year, this one's pretty easy, 006. 4, again, identifies the field. These are the rows I picked from, 5 and 6. And then having my initial first means I picked it. And then Ingrid's initial I means she packed it. So just some simple ideas. It takes a little while, I think, to get in the habit of this. But once you are in the habit of it, it's pretty easy to go through and identify and create these lot codes. And then we have one more. This one is a greenhouse one. So similar to a conventional field layout, if you're working in a greenhouse or maybe you have aquaponics and you have tables, you want to use the same methodology. So you just want to identify in your greenhouse the racks. Maybe if it's in aquaponics, you want to have tables. And so instead of the field here as our green second number, we're going to have the greenhouse number. So what greenhouse did it come from? And then what were the racks that we picked from? So pretty simple. You can apply this methodology to almost any type of growing scenario. And I think now it's back to Ingrid.
All right. Okay, you guys. So for homework, there's coming up homework number 4. This is a Google Sheet question. I'm blanking on the name. You know, it's just like your other homework. But it asks a lot about your harvesting procedure. So there's a place to list, you know, who would be part of your mock recall team or your actual recall team. A few questions like that. And then it gets into questions about your harvesting process, post-harvest, what that looks like. So again, just try to be as detailed as possible and as accurate as possible. What is actually happening on your farm during these things, during your harvest procedures and post-harvest. Again, this is what we take, this information, we take and put it right into your farm plan. So we just want to know exactly what you guys are doing. Ensure your business name and address is displayed at the point of purchase. This is a FSMA requirement, so it's kind of just a note here. And then in the next few weeks, look out for emails on scheduling your risk assessment. So we will start reaching out and getting those scheduled. Again, like I said, for new farms, it's typically about an hour. If it goes over that, then we'll schedule another meeting. So we don't want to hold you guys for too long. And then just continue completing records on Heavy Connect. We do need at least 3 months of records in order for us to complete an internal audit. So everyone will get an internal audit, and the more records there are, the better and the more successful. So really starting now, you want to start keeping these consistent records on Heavy Connect. And then so what's coming up? Scheduling WPS trainings. This will be hosted on Zoom. So again, just kind of keep an eye out for your emails. We will begin doing WPS training. That's typically right under an hour, so not too long. And it is an annual, if you're using pesticides, it's an annual requirement. So you'll need the training once a year. And then, like I mentioned, scheduling your risk assessment, and then we will start working on your the development of your farm food safety plan. Again, we use your homework for that information. And then way down the line, preparation for your first internal audit. Like I mentioned, we need those records. So starting now to keep really good, consistent records is super important. And that's it. That's it. Pretty quick. We're just under an hour. Are there any questions or comments?
Question?
Yes.
I previously asked about whether this looker notification I'm getting to review some Heavy Connect records report was legitimate, and was told yes that it is. And I asked about using a username and password, which it requires, and asked if it was the same as the one to use for Heavy Connect. and somebody was going to get back to me, and I don't see that anybody's gotten back to me. So what do we do about the username and password for Looker?
Okay, I believe, yeah, you were speaking with Chess about that, and we can touch base with her again and see what the deal is with that. I feel like she did bring this up though. Lisa, do you know?
I think, yeah, I think what happened is we have to get Cecilia at Heavy Connect to set it up for George to be able to receive those reports. And I think she was just away.
Oh, okay.
She was away. I think that's what it was, George. We'll double check with Chess though and get that for you.
That's fine.
Yeah, I think it's
Okay.
just a setup where they just on Heavy Connect's end have to set it so that you receive the Looker reports.
Yeah. Initially, I just wanted to make sure that this wasn't somebody's phishing edition to get my user name and password for Heavy Connect, but okay, thank you.
Sure. Other questions? Wow. One thing I'll mention for you guys, we do a newsletter for our farmer group every so often. We try to make it quarterly, which is ambitious and sometimes doesn't happen, but we do have one prepped, ready to go out shortly. And so I'll be adding you guys to the mailing list. It just provides a little information kind of on things that are pertinent to you as GroupGAP farmers, but also what North Shore EVP is doing, as well as in the broader landscape of particularly the partners that we work with. So when we have information about events that CTAR staff are putting on or other partners across the state, survey information, we put that in there. So we'll hopefully get that out within the next couple of days by Monday. And so look for that too in your email. If you don't want to get it, you can unsubscribe very easily or just shoot me an email today and let me know you don't want to be added to it. But it's a pretty valuable piece of information. We try not to send it out too often, so we're not clogging your email box.
Let me ask some questions about mock recall, if I may. How far back do my vendors have to go on the mock recall? I've got some restaurants which are clearly end users. With those, do I just notify them and then that's the end of the line? Or when I go to a market where the market is selling directly to the next end consumer, what does the market have to do to reply to on the mark recall? And then when I go to a distributor who then sells it to a market, who then sells it to somebody, how far back do they have to do reporting on this mock recall?
Good questions. So with the mock recall, your responsibility is just to contact the buyer and say, especially in the pretend situation, here's what I am doing. I'm doing a mock exercise. I have sent you this many cases of cucumbers. Can you tell me where they are? Or how much you have left? So ideally, the buyer, the person that you're selling your stuff to, is going to be able to say within that 4-hour window, okay, George, of the 10 cases that you sent me, we put one on the shelf. We have the other 9 in our reefer or something like that. Ideally, that's the idea. That's all they have to be able to do. They don't have to identify the next customer. They just have to be able to do that one step. So their job and what we're looking for is 100% reconciliation. So if you sent 10 cases, we need to know something about 10 cases. That's the goal. And within that 4 hours, you can say, yep, I reached out to my buyer and I got something back.
So let's apply what I think I understand from you. To get 100% reconciliation, those that I sell to the restaurant, does the restaurant, I mean, they're an end user. Do they even have to report back? Or do they report back and say, of the 100 pounds of lemons I got from you last week, we have 35.5 pounds left.
Exactly. The
Okay,
second one. So they would say we've got 35.5 pounds left. That means that the other 65 pounds or so, or 64.5 pounds was used. So that's your 100% reconciliation.
and the market says the same thing. And the distributor that I gave it to says, do they just say that of the 36 cases we've gotten, 30 of them have gone to markets and restaurants, and we have 6 cases left in the reefer?
Exactly.
They don't have to identify who it was that they went to.
No,
Okay.
no. And if it was a real recall situation, that step would then be on them, not on you.
Okay.
So, yeah. But in this case, as the farmer here, you just need to be able to say, I know everything I did on my side, and I know exactly who I sent my stuff to, and they can tell how much of it and where it is now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Absolutely. No question. I feel like that was a dump truck load of information. So if you're shell shocked, you can always email us later. But I promise it will make more sense probably a little bit later, or if you're employing some of those things already, it probably makes sense already to you. If that's it, then we will let you guys go, and we will see you next week for class 5, which is going to be officially halfway through. And we'll be really going into the field scope of the harmonized GAP standards. So we'll be spending a lot of time on those individual categories that we talked a little bit about today. So land use, water use, animals, things like that will be coming up. So thank you guys. Have a wonderful hump day.
Bye,
Thank
guys.
you.
Thank you. Aloha.